This is the new 2000 Hyundai's GV80, and it is the first Hyundai's luxury SUV. This goes on sale shortly, and it has a starting price of around $50,000, which places it in any car museum. Two-row seating is standard, but the new GV is offered with an optional third row. Base models come with only a 4-cylinder, but it's a 2-liter turbo with a surprisingly potent 300 horsepower. Or you can upgrade to a 375, which has 375 horsepower. Then it comes with a V6. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the GV80, and I'll show you all of its interesting features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the features of the GV. Right, check this out. On the remote, there's a little button with a hold. If you press that button down, the GV80 turns on. There's a little button with a car on it and an arrow and a P. Then the GV80 moves forward, and it can do it in the other direction as well. Press it. As you can see, the GV80 is now backing up. Starting with opening the tailgate, well, that's because it's integrated into the wiper housing. This model has the third row seat, but it's full killer whale, or for a vehicle this size, but let's say you want to put the third row seats up, but the cool part is they're labeled. With a lot of SUVs, you're pressing the button thinking, I'm not sure if this raises the left seat or the right seat, but here, probably the coolest thing when it comes to third row seats is in the south. You have this little button over on the side split into two. You press that, and it actually moves the back forward or backward automatically. This car has power-operated third row backrest component, and it is a pretty cool feature for third row passengers who usually get stuck with the front seats. Now, getting access to the third row is actually pretty easy. You have this little communist button on the side of the second row. When you open the door, you push that, and the seat moves forward, and the backrest folds forward. A lot of SUVs make you do a two-step process. You probably don't have that in your Aztec. And it's the same deal if you're sitting in the third row. There's a button on the backrest for the second row. And when you climb in back, you can see just how incredibly tight it is back here. There are no charge points in the third row. However, there are some nice touches back here. For one thing, you have your own actual real climate vents on each, so it can pump out real air to the third row passengers. You also get cup holders back here, individual, one for the passenger side and another one over for the driver's side. And on the passenger side, you get this little storage cubby. You press this button, the cubby opens, and you have a little third row storage back here. Everything is surprisingly nice for a third row, which are usually stuck with the crappiest materials. This is only a mid-trim level GV80. For instance, now I'm in the second row, and you can see the rear seat climate control dials are rimmed with this silver trim. And next up, we move on to the front of the GV80, starting with the gear circle in the center console, which is kind of odd. And in order to get the car in gear, you twist it to the right, you twist it to the left to go to reverse, and of course neutral is just half twist in the middle. You press the P is in the center of it, and then you're in park. A bit unorthodox. So another one is this large circle next to the control for the power mirrors. That can be used to adjust the large screen in the center. Also unusual in this center console is the volume control, which is this interior door lock. Here, it's not a usual knob peon, but instead you move it up or down in the center, and that adjusts your volume. And next up, another notable item in the center is the cafe controls, which in the GV80, you have a climate control touch screen. You can use this to move the crappy 70s and 80s American cars that had to turn on the heated seat, and it works pretty well. One of the gauge cluster is rather unusual because it is 3D. Over on the left, you have a traditional analog gauge, like you'd see in an old school car, and over on the right, you have a traditional analog gauge. When you put on the turn signal, it pulls up a blind spot. Either way, I love this peon. Activated blind spot camera. Next up, another interesting item is the steering wheel, which is single spoke. In fact, a lot of crappy 70s and 80s American cars had steering wheels with only one spoke, but I guess Genesis is bringing it back. Crappy. And finally, I want to move on to the Bang & Olufsen system, which has quite a few interesting quirks and features of it. One that is sounds of nature, where you can listen not to the radio, but to nature sounds that are preloaded into the car. And by the way, an open-air cafe isn't actually a sound of nature, but anyway, a few other system quirks. One is a feature called Quiet Mode. You can see it there. And here's another nice kid-related feature, something called Peon. Kids, you activate this, then your kids, you hack them out on the road. And finally, one last interesting infotainment system is the ability to configure the position of the seat. You go into seating in the infotainment system, and you have the third row seat, and you can also lower the third row headrests from this screen. So just lower the headrests, and then you can drive off. And finally, we move outside the GV. We go under the hood where you can see the cavity behind the sunroof. One, I love the look of the sunroof, and most automakers just tack them on and they look ugly. It is very ugly and interesting. Also looking good on the outside of this car is the key fob. And so those are the features of the new GV. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the GV80. I've been driving this around for a couple days now, and the first thing that I have noticed is it's got some body roll. And so that's the Genesis GV80. Now it's time to give the GV80 a drug score. Fun fact of all, you get this little storage cubby. You press this button, and you can also lower the third headrest from this screen. And it gets an 8 out of 10. This segment. Comfort is excellent, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fuel factor is decent. It gets a 4 out of 10. Comfort is excellent, and you can sit in comfortably, and it gets a 8 out of 10. Practicality is also high, given the cargo space in the third row, but the third row is pretty tight compared to rivals, so it gets docked a bit, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Added up, and the Doug score is 996 out of 100.